Uh-oh. Sounds like somebody's got a case of the Mondays.
You are now listening to the Unscripted Ohio podcast, brought to you by Buckeye Grove. For all the latest Buckeyes news, analysis, reaction, and the best Ohio State community on the entire internet, head over to buckeyegrove.com or follow us on Twitter at Ohio State Rivals. Without any further delay, it's time to get unscripted. Broadcasting from Podcast Central, a place that is not his mother's basement.
Hey, Mom! We get some meatloaf!
We promise. Here's your host, Kyle Lamb.
Hey, Mom! The meatloaf!
Good Monday. Welcome back. It is the Unscripted Ohio podcast. I am your host, Kyle Lamb, the captain of the Unscripted Ohio ship. We are, of course, now brought to you by JFQ Lending, in addition to Buckeye Grove. All your home purchase and refinance needs should be handled by a Buckeye, licensed in 33 states and more waiting. You'll also never pay for your appraisal with these guys, so email info@jfqlending.com or visit jfqlending.com for more information. Ohio State is going dancing, as I predicted on Friday. They are in the NCAA tournament. We know their opponent. They will be playing Iowa State, if that name sounds familiar. That is the team that Aaron Kraft dropped a dime on the Cyclones in the 2013 NCAA tournament. Remember, Aaron Kraft hit that game-winning three-pointer that sent the Buckeyes to the second round, where they eventually got beat by, I believe it was Arizona in the second round. So it was not a happy ending, but they did beat Iowa State. Here we are 6 years later, a rematch of Ohio State and Iowa State in the first round. That will take place Friday night in Tulsa, Oklahoma. It will be a late tip-off. I know many of you do not appreciate that, but at least it's on a Friday. It will be roughly a 9:50 start. They will play, the winner of that game will play the winner of Houston and Georgia State, which tips off at 7:20 Friday night. And then, so the Ohio State, Iowa State game will tip roughly 30 minutes after the conclusion of Houston, Georgia State, somewhere in the ballpark of 9:50, possibly even as late as 10 p.m. So unfortunately, it will be a late tip-off, but the Buckeyes are in the NCAA tournament. We've got a few things here that a few angles I want to talk about. I'll talk about the matchup, what I think of Ohio State's first round opponent. We will also talk about the bracket as a whole here coming up a little bit in a few minutes. Chad Sherwood and David Griggs, they are a couple of friends of mine. They run hoopshd.com. They also run a mock selection committee. They are going to be on the show. We'll talk about Ohio State's draw. We'll talk about what they think of the bracket as a whole with the Big Ten and some of the potential chances for spoilers. You know, who is going to put on the Cinderella slippers this year? We'll talk about chances for upsets and who may come out of some of the regions. So Chad Sherwood and David Griggs coming up. We'll talk more big picture stuff with the NCAA tournament. And later in the show, just a couple of quick recruiting items that I want to get into. Football recruiting never stops, obviously. It is gone for the time being because there's not a lot going on, but it's definitely not forgotten. So there are a few things that I will talk about later in the show. So first things first, Ohio State is dancing. They will be playing the Iowa State Cyclones on Friday night in Tulsa. Now, first observations about this, Ohio State has a thin margin for error no matter who they're going to play. And any opponent at this time in the season, once you get into the NCAA tournament, you've got a thin margin for error. You're going to play somebody good no matter what. And look, Iowa State fits the bill. They just won the Big 12 Conference Championship. They beat Kansas in the tournament final. First thing first, let's get this out of the way. They are a very talented offensive team. They've got a couple of NBA guards. They're going to be tough to stop. They've got some decent shooters, and what's more is Iowa State. They're one of the top offensive teams in the country, statistically speaking. In fact, they are number 9 in the Ken Pomeroy offensive ratings adjusted for competition. So that means they are a top 10 offense. Now, if you look at their offensive numbers, they're not necessarily overwhelming from a shooting or a scoring standpoint, but they shoot it pretty well. They score pretty well. They get to the line. They make free throws at a decent rate, a decent pace. And what's more is they don't turn the ball over. They're very good at handling the ball. So when you add all that in, they don't have a lot of wasted possessions, and they score at a relatively good pace when they do, in fact, take care of the basketball, which they usually do. So this Iowa State offense is very talented. Bill Self actually said after the game on Saturday when the Jayhawks lost to Iowa State, he said he thought that Iowa State was the best offense that they have in the Big 12 this year. And I believe that. They're really good. So it's an uphill battle for the Buckeyes from that standpoint. They've got their work cut out for them. They're going to have to show up playing good defense. But there is an uptick here. There's an upshot. Some positive news, some optimistic news, and that is Iowa State defensively is very vulnerable. They're only number 59 in the country in defensive efficiency. They have been very, very inconsistent overall as a team. On offense, somewhat, but on defense especially, they're a mediocre defense. And there are two things here that I like about Ohio State's matchup against Iowa State that I think could come into play. And I want you to remember this. This is why I think Ohio State has a favorable matchup despite the fact that Iowa State is a very talented team. First and foremost, Iowa State is not very good at forcing turnovers, okay? They force turnovers just 16% of their possessions this year. And that is important because there's only 189 in the country, okay? Out of 350 teams, they are only 189 at forcing turnovers by their opponents. And that's good because think of Ohio State, which has gotten, I don't know if you've noticed this here, but Ohio State has actually gotten a lot better here down the stretch at taking care of the basketball. That's not to say they've been perfect. They're still turning it over more than you would ideally want them to do. But they have gotten away from some of those games where they were, coughing it up 20, 21, 22 times. They've cut it down to 14, 15, 16. So they have basically cut out about 4 to 6 turnovers a game. And that's huge because that can mean another 6, 8, sometimes 10 points in a game that you score. So they're cutting out turnovers, and Iowa State is not very good at forcing them. So here's an opponent that is kind of like Wisconsin, Michigan State, who do play, both of those teams play good defense, but they're not good at forcing turnovers. Iowa State is actually not very good at forcing turnovers, and they're a very inconsistent team. So that is, number one, I think Ohio State has a chance to go into this game with the hope of maybe turning it over 10, 12, 13 times. So that's some good news right there. The second thing that I like about this matchup, looking at Iowa State statistically and having seen them a few times, they're very long on the wing. They are basically a 3-guard lineup. They have a lot of 6'4", 6'5", 6'6" wings that are very long for their position. That does allow them to challenge passing lanes and keep teams honest when it comes to jump shots, okay? They are good at closeouts, and they will make you work offensively as far as trying to shoot over them. But the good news is they are not big up front. They are not real tall up front. And that is one of the things that's really killed Ohio State in the past is teams that have multiple 6'7", 6'8", 6'9", 6'10 guys up front. They have been the ones that have given Caleb Wesson the most fits, that have really given Ohio State trouble finishing at the rim. And Iowa State is not one of those teams. They are a little bit long, like I said, on the wing. Their forwards, their guards are 6'4", 6'5", 6'6". They are longer for their positions, but they don't have the 6'9" length up front, really. They've got one guy that starts for them that is 6'9". He's really long. After that, they don't play a whole lot. They've got one other guy that's 6'9" that will come in and play about 8 to 10 minutes a game. So this is another advantage for Ohio State. Yes, they're going to have their work cut out for them, trying to keep Iowa State's pace down, trying to keep them from scoring a lot. But I really like the matchup for the Ohio State offense. This is a team they can really score against. I think because of the combination of not having a lot of length up front, not turning them over a lot, Ohio State, if they go into this and get good possessions like I think they will where they're not coughing it up a lot, and they're not having as many problems finishing at the rim. I think this is a team that Ohio State can score against. The opening line for this game is Iowa State -6.5, so the Cyclones are 6.5-point favorite. I think this is a game that Ohio State can win. I really do. I like this matchup. So should be a great game for Ohio State. It's obviously going to be a good opponent, and no matter who they play from here on out, they're likely to be underdogs against. But the key is, are there matchups that Ohio State can go into this thinking that they can win, playing good basketball? They have Caleb Wesson back on the floor. That has meant a lot in terms of confidence. We've seen that so far, not only against Indiana, but even against Michigan State. I thought Ohio State looked like a confident team early on against Michigan State. They got into foul trouble, it wasn't able to materialize for them. You know, the Michigan State game got away. That Spartan game, I felt like, had that game not gone as it had, and I'm not blaming the refs, because I actually think, even though the officiating was very poor, I thought Ohio State made some very bad decisions that got themselves into foul trouble. Keyshawn Woods and Caleb Wesson both being in foul trouble early really hurt Ohio State's rhythm. Woods came out, he looked great against Indiana, and he came out actually having another good game against Michigan State, or at least early on it looked like he was going to have another good game against Michigan State. But picking up 3 fouls in the first half, and then Caleb Wesson in that second half, when Ohio State came out, they came back from a 6-point deficit at halftime and actually took a 2-point lead. They were playing really good basketball. It was tied, and they come down, and you had that double foul where, Michigan State is called for a common foul and Caleb Wesson is called for a flagrant foul, which was the right call, by the way. I'm not disagreeing with that call at all. That was a flagrant call. It's kind of tough luck for Caleb because he's just responding to physical play where he's getting pushed in the back and he's trying to clear space, and he swings his elbow. It's the right call, but it's an unfortunate call for him. But that game really turned the momentum because Michigan State shoots the 2 flagrant free throws, and then they come down and they get the ball back on the flagrant, and then they hit that 3-pointer, and the game's momentum really changed from there. And then Caleb Wesson picks up a 4th foul a few minutes later. He picks up a 5th foul after sitting for a little bit because Michigan State made a run. They had to get Wesson back in there, and he comes in, and within like 30 seconds, he picks up his 5th foul, and the game was over at that point. It's really unfortunate. I thought Ohio State came out with the look of a team that could have beat Michigan State, but they have such a fine margin for error, and when they get themselves into foul trouble, they just can't deal with those circumstances against a team like Michigan State, and that's what happened. They fell apart because they don't have that margin for error. But I think we saw an Ohio State team that when they've got Caleb Wesson out there, I think they've got a lot more confidence right now. I feel like they feel like they can come out and beat a team like Iowa State, or if they play Houston in the second round, if they're able to beat Iowa State. I like this. I really like this matchup for Ohio State. It's not an easy matchup. Iowa State, like any team at this point in their position, are not going to be easy to beat. But I think that vulnerability with the Cyclone defense really presents an opening for Ohio State. They can show up and play smart basketball and not turn it over like Iowa State has not really, like I said, the Cyclones have not forced these turnovers in the past. If Ohio State can take advantage of that, I really think you're going to see a good game, a close game. Ohio State will have a chance to advance. If you're looking ahead, and I'm not saying you should, one game at a time. I know you're just fans. You can look ahead all you want. If you think Ohio State is going to beat Iowa State, there's nothing wrong with that. It's not going to impact the game any. But, this is still a tough game for Ohio State. But if you want to look ahead, I really actually do like this Houston team a lot. They're a 3 seed. They're experienced. They have 5 guys on the floor. Their starters, all 5 of them can score. They're number 24 in the Ken Pomeroy offensive efficiency. They're a really good defensive team, number 13. And they just play tough physical defense. They're disciplined. They play with great fundamentals. They're well coached by Kelvin Sampson. I like this Houston team a lot. It would be interesting to see whether Houston is playing Iowa State or Ohio State. It'll be interesting to see how Houston handles the pressure. Last year, they lost to Michigan in the second round of the NCAA tournament. I'm curious how Houston plays in this first game. against Georgia State as a 14 seed, and then if they win that in the second round, we'll see if they've learned anything from that experience in the NCAA tournament last year. But anyway, Ohio State, Iowa State will be roughly a 9:45, 9:50 type of tip-off Friday night in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I like the Buckeyes matchup. We'll see what happens with them in the NCAA tournament. Chris Holtmann, by the way, if there was any doubt as to how good of a coach he is, this is the 5th straight NCAA tournament appearance for Chris Holtmann. He is a perfect 5 for 5 at Butler and Ohio State. And I don't see that stopping anytime soon because I really think Ohio State will be a high seed next year. And with the momentum of the program, the way recruiting is going, you got to think that this is going to be a routine appearance for Ohio State. The question is, can they win those Big Ten titles and advance deep into the NCAA tournament in the future? That is the question. Hopefully we will have some answers in the coming seasons. But Ohio State, Iowa State, 9:50-ish tip-off Friday night in Tulsa. I have my guests on now. They are living proof that two heads are not necessarily better than one. David Griggs, Chad Sherwood, they are hoopshd.com representatives. This is kind of their prime time of the year, coming off of the NCAA tournament stuff. Guys, it's a pleasure having you on. I'm not sure my listeners will agree by the end of the show, but for right now, it's a pleasure. David, I got to ask you how crushed you are as the world's only Nebraska ball superfan that Tim Miles and company are not in the NCAA tournament.
Oh, wait, was that today?
Yeah, that was today.
The selection show?
Yeah,
oh, man. I mean, I just don't understand. I mean, again, they're just running uphill into the wind, pushing a heavy tire, and the dark web keeps them down. They won more Big Ten tournament games than Purdue, yet Purdue's in and Nebraska isn't, and that just doesn't make any sense to me.
It's one of life's greatest mysteries, really. Chad, you as a in your spare time, you practice as an attorney, keeping this guy out of trouble. I wonder how you managed to balance all of this.
Well, you know, Kyle, when you asked me to be on, I was so excited that I actually got to be on the air and not have David Griggs hounding me. And then I get here and I found out you brought him along also, and I'm kind of upset.
You should be a little bit offended. It's like I asked you to come on, and you're really excited. You're thinking, hey, I'm really honored that Kai would have me on his show. And then you find out David's on with you, and it's like it kind of cheapens the experience, doesn't it?
It really did. But we'll try to get through the show anyhow, I guess.
Okay, so you guys, so I want to explain to the listeners, first of all, that are probably wondering, who the hell these guys are. So
if they're still listening.
If they're still listening.
I mean, I wouldn't be.
So you guys run HoopsHD, hoopshd.com, which was a project of ours several years ago. It's been how many years now since we started that thing? Has it been like 6-7 years?
At least, yeah.
Yeah, something like that. It was birthed from, you had started the mock committee, so I guess you were the genesis of all of this. I came along a little later, but the mock committee it went from us meeting up for a couple of days in March to having an email thread to where we kept up throughout the year. And the content of the email thread was really good. And it's like, well, why aren't we putting this on the internet? So I don't remember at what point we made that transition, but it's been 5 years, 6 years, something like that. But this whole project predates even Hoops HD.
Yeah, so I want to go back in time. So I actually, as they mentioned, I started this mock selection committee. It's been, I think, 18 years ago. And some of you guys may remember, Galen Clavio, who, runs the Crimson Cast podcast. I had him on a few weeks ago when we were talking about the Indiana-Ohio State preview. He is one of the original 10 members that I had for this mock selection committee like 18 years ago. So we started this thing. It was just a little hobby we did on the side to predict and project the NCAA tournament. It stuck. We wound up having a rotating panel, and we've been doing this 18 years. And now Chad has actually, the last several years has been taking it over for me. I used to run the committee every year, and I kind of got worn out with it, and I didn't have enough time. So Chad has graciously taken it over and done a great job with it. And now these guys continue to do it. So I decided, hey, let's talk about the NCAA tournament bracket because, they submerged themselves in all of this for the last couple of weeks of the season. And
it's really,
it's really
November.
It's really all season long, but especially the last couple of months when you really get into the nitty gritty of the projection. So I want to give you guys an opportunity first to just kind of ballpark this before we start talking about Ohio State and the Big Ten and some of the thoughts. I want to get your general consensus on the bracket itself as a whole. Let's start with you, David. Any first observations at the bracket this year? Thoughts and opinions on how the committee did? Anything that stands out with you?
All in all, in general, and I mean, we'll get to some specific stuff later that I didn't like or really liked, but in general, I was more pleased with it this year than I have been the previous 2 or 3 years. This was the first year of the NET rankings, of course, but the last 2 or 3 years, I thought, and again, this is just my opinion, and I know the two of you probably don't necessarily agree with it, that they were looking, when they would evaluate a team, they would look at how good the team was that they played and basically just put them into very general, shallow categories, top 50 wins, top 100 wins. And while, in my opinion, when you beat a team that's good overall at home, but this overall good team is weak on the road, that isn't necessarily as hard to do as beating them on a neutral site or going on the road and beating them. I know I sound like a broken record to you all, but there's probably people listening that haven't heard this. So for a team like Belmont, who went to Murray State and won, went to Lipscomb and won, and went to Austin Peay and won, those 3 teams were a combined 33-6 at home, I think. 3 of those 6 losses were to Belmont. That's hard to do. And if you don't think it is, just ask yourself this question. If you had the chance, if they said, Coach, all right, you're going to get $1 million bonus, but you got to do one of these 2 things. You either got to beat Auburn at home, who has a losing road record, or you got to go on the road and win all 3 of those games. Anyone who isn't insane is going to be like, well, give me Auburn at home. So I think the committee was more tuned into not just who were you playing, but where were you playing them, and when did you play them, and how hard was it to win the games that you won. And I think that came out with some of the selections. I think one of the things that they rewarded was teams that played a lot of games away from home and won them.
Chad, maybe I was detached from this bracket because I didn't do my own bracket this year. And so if you don't go through the process, maybe you don't have a handle on everything as much as you would if you go through the process like you guys did with the mock committee and your own personal brackets. But this is the first year I can remember where, I'm watching these selections and there wasn't anything that really irritated me. I thought that they did a pretty good job, and the only thing that I had a problem with is maybe Michigan State being a 2 seed in Duke's region. I thought, okay, wait, if they're a team that probably should have been in contention for a 1 seed, putting them in the East region with Duke, I mean, that didn't seem okay to me, but for the most part with the selections and the seeding, there weren't too many things for me that jumped out. I thought this was the most pleasant bracket that I've seen from them, maybe ever, for me personally.
I got to agree with you, Kyle. This was didn't look at this bracket when it came out, and I wasn't offended by anything grossly. There are things I would not have done. One of them at the very bottom, I would not have had Arizona State in. I liked a few other teams, including TCU and a certain Big Ten team that Galen seems to like a lot better than Arizona State. And really, it's kind of funny that some of the things I was most offended by, if I had to be offended by anything, all related to the Big Ten. I kind of felt that the entire Big Ten was underseeded versus where I thought they belonged, and Indiana being left out on top of that. So, right from the top down, I think the mistakes seem to be more Big Ten centric, and you have the conspiracy theories saying, well, hey, you had a Pac-12 guy running the tournament, and really no Big Ten. I guess there is Big Ten representation from Northwestern on the committee, but that's it.
Does that really count as having Big Ten representation?
Well, that's why I kind of hesitated.
like Northwestern.
And very weird. One of those very minor bracketing things. But even that team up north getting the rematch of the same team they played in the first round last year was they're not supposed to do things like that, and that's a very easy fix. So, couple head scratchers related to Big Ten teams, but other than that, I thought this was one of the best brackets I've seen in a long time.
It's interesting, Chad, because as the bracket was being unveiled, you mentioned, with Minnesota's placement and then especially Iowa's placement, because Minnesota being a 10, I thought seemed about right, but Iowa being a 10, then it's like, at that point, it's like, well, Ohio State could be in trouble here. As it turns out, Ohio State finished actually on the seed list. Minnesota was 39, Ohio State was 41, which is really fascinating to me because they came in a lot closer than I think people would have expected. So it turns out Ohio State wasn't in trouble. They did get in. But are you surprised with Minnesota and more, especially with Iowa, how low they were at the 10 line?
I agree. I think those were two of the biggest seeding surprises for me were Minnesota and Iowa. But even further up, I thought Wisconsin would have been a top 4 seed. They fell down to the 5 line. And I mean, Ohio State, I actually thought they would be playing in Dayton in the first 4. So I think they avoided that by 1 spot, I believe. And so at least you get to skip 1 round of the tournament, although, Ohio State playing in Dayton could have been a very easy game to win as well. So
yeah, it finished. So if I remember this correctly, Ohio State finished 41 on the seed list, right, with the seed list being basically the master ranking by the committee. 42 was Belmont, 43 would have been Temple. Then it jumped down to, I think, 45 was Arizona State, and 47 was St. John's. But those were the final 4 at-large teams right there. So there were a couple of automatic bids sprinkled in between there. But they went 41 or 42, 43, 45, 47. So David, the thing I'm trying to make sense of, and we'll circle back to the Ohio State thing here in a minute, but I'm trying to make sense of the Pac-12 and what the committee was looking at. I don't necessarily have a problem with Arizona State sneaking in, but man, Washington being in that 8-9 game, them getting that high, I mean, is there anything in their profile that would have suggested they would be that high, except for simply winning the Pac-12, which was a very weak league this year? But I don't see anything else to justify them being that high.
There isn't. And they beat a team that's in the field by virtue of losing to that team yesterday. That's Oregon. They had beaten them earlier and then lost for the second time pretty big. Now, the best thing that you could say for Washington up until about 2 or 3 weeks ago was, while they weren't beating teams that were on the bubble or inside the bubble or near the bubble, they were winning all the games that they were supposed to win. They were winning fairly convincingly, and they hadn't lost to anybody that's crap. And then Cal beat them, and there's crap, and then there's a big, 20-foot, then there's 50 feet of more crap, and then there's Cal.
Well, to David, quite honestly, though, that Cal loss was so far down the team sheet, maybe the committee just didn't see it.
Yeah, that is true. I mean, you got to scroll down pretty far to get down there. Maybe they just didn't. Maybe the printers were broken.
I appreciate how hard he was working on the crap analogy, though. He was trying really hard to express that.
Right. Well, Cal is not very good. I mean, it's like when you show up to a Cal game, they give you a spoon to gouge your eyeballs out with, because that's how painful it is to watch them. But no, I mean, when the best thing you can say for somebody is that they haven't lost to anybody that's crappy, and then they lose to somebody as bad as Cal, I think it sinks them. Now, I'm not necessarily surprised because this is pretty consistent with, a first-place outright team from, a Power 5 conference or a multi-bid league is typically going to be in that range, or, higher most of the time. But still, at face value, Washington, their next win against a team inside the bubble will be their first.
Yeah, I want people to visualize this. On the crap scale, there's losing to crap, there's losing to Nebraska, and there's losing to Cal. That's how bad it is. Losing to Cal is below losing to crap and losing to Nebraska.
Losing to Nebraska would have moved them up, so long as they played well.
So, Chad, what do you think of Ohio State's first-round opponent, Iowa State? In the times you've seen them this year, they've obviously been a very good offensive team, kind of been inconsistent. Now they win the Big 12 tournament, and there's a lot of expectations for Iowa State. But what kind of team do you think Ohio State is playing, and how do you see this matchup playing out?
I think this is it's an interesting matchup here. This Iowa State team had started off so good, and they just kind of fell into the end of February, beginning of March. They were playing awful. They were losing everybody they played. They lost the game at Texas. They lost to Texas Tech at home. They lost a game at West Virginia. And I was ready to write this team off. Then they go to the Big 12 tournament as a 5 seed and pull 3 straight upsets to win the whole thing. But it's kind of what Iowa State seems to do every year. They've won, I think, 3 Big 12 tournaments in the last 5 or 6 years here now.
Yeah.
And so I am not on board with this Iowa State team, and I think that Ohio State is at the end of the day is actually going to be the better team. I really think that the Buckeyes are going to win this game. I just don't. I have no faith that this Iowa State team was anything other than just doing what they seem to do every year in the Big 12 tournament and making a run there.
Well, the game is in Tulsa, which is sort of in Big 12 territory. They got a big arena there. Ohio State's going to be in trouble if Iowa State mistakes this for a Big 12 tournament.
Boy, if they mistake this for a Big 12 tournament game, it's no wonder Iowa State's been so unfortunate in the NCAA tournament the last couple of years. So I want to ask you about the potential matchup for either Ohio State or Iowa State, because I know you guys are big on this Houston team. I'm really big on this Houston team. I think they are. They've got some NBA type of bodies. They play really well together. They play great offensively. They're a very good defensive team. David, you especially, I want to start here. It's kind of interesting because the only thing we don't know about this Houston team, and Kelvin Sampson kind of alluded to it today. I saw him referencing that they're not used to being in this position. It's kind of interesting he would admit that, because it's almost like he doesn't know how his guys are going to show up for the NCAA tournament, not really being accustomed to this type of success. But I do like this Houston team. I'm curious what you think about them and what kind of a second-round matchup they would be for either Ohio State or Iowa State.
I like them a lot. I think that they're really athletic, and they did have the home game against LSU. That was back in December, I think. But whatever it was earlier. But to his point, like when you're looking at the Big Ten, when you're looking at the ACC, and when you're looking at pretty much the majority of the protected seeds, they are playing against high-caliber competition. They're playing against a lot of teams that are in the top half of the bracket. It's rare. I think we do the write-ups on Hoops HD every night, and it's, more often than not, they're playing against someone that's inside the bubble, whereas Houston is not. But having said that, like when they did get those chances, with the exception of today, they went to Cincinnati and ran them over. They beat LSU. They look to me like they're built to go far in the tournament. And let's not forget, I know that they lost some things from a year ago, but this was a team that basically had Michigan finished off. And, they committed a bad foul. They missed a free throw or two that could have iced the game. And then Michigan hits a 70-footer. And Michigan goes all the way to the championship game, and you can't help but wonder. It's human nature to think that Houston may have gone another round or two into the tournament had it not been for that. So they were really close to being really high up there a year ago, and they're even better this year. So as far as Ohio State, I think that in that situation they would pretty much run them over, or Iowa State too.
Chad, we don't typically expect 14 seeds to come out and have a chance to pull upsets, although they do occasionally. Is this Georgia State team, is that a team that can beat Houston, in your opinion?
I like this Georgia State team. I've liked them all season. You got to love Ron Hunter as the head coach there on the bench. I would have loved to have picked Georgia State to win a first-round game. This is the wrong 3 seed for them, though. I don't think they have any shot against Houston. This could be a complete blowout here. No, I don't think Houston's going to have any trouble with that. And honestly, I kind of agree with David. I don't think Houston's going to have much trouble getting past the Iowa State-Ohio State winner either, and getting onto the Sweet 16.
Yeah, I like this.
Where they meet Kentucky, it's a different story.
I like this Houston team a lot. I think Ohio State, looking at it from an Ohio State point of view, I think because of Iowa State's inconsistency, I think they are ripe for Ohio State possibly winning that game. But that Houston team, I think, is going to be a very, very tough team to get past.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, we could be heading to a fascinating Sweet 16 matchup between Houston and Kentucky there that I really like, but I don't think that Ohio State can get past that unless something crazy happens.
I'm curious, in the discussion of double-digit seeds, let's say 12 seeds on down, what are the teams, David, I'll start with you, what are the teams you like for possible upsets in this tournament?
Let me see, 12 seeds on down. Liberty, I like them a lot because while Lipscomb's not in the tournament, while they didn't play a tough schedule, they did win 2 really hard games to win. You know, both of them at Lipscomb, and that second game in particular was pretty tough. Now, was it, you know, Mississippi State on a neutral floor, Lipscomb, who had only had one home loss, and you might recall Lipscomb had some pretty decent wins throughout the year. They won at TCU. I want to say, did they win another? They won, well, SMU, but they kind of fell off the earth. But they're kind of built to maybe get past a team like Mississippi State, but you almost kind of wish they could have gotten somebody else. Oregon is another team that is just absolutely on fire. I mean, they're not necessarily under the radar, and they just won the Pac-12, but they have a huge head of steam built up, and they're kind of running downhill fast. The other team, and I just can't get past this because of history, Old Dominion, most of your listeners probably won't realize this, for the last 4 years, Conference USA has put a team in the round of 32, and this Old Dominion team, I mean, they're swinging way over their heads. Who is it they're matched up against? Purdue, and another Big Ten team. But this is an Old Dominion team that won at Syracuse. They beat VCU, who's in the field. And while they didn't always play up to their ceiling, when they do play up that high, they're tough to beat. They're certainly higher than a 14-seeded caliber team, and you can't help but wonder, is Conference USA going to do it for a fifth year?
Hey, Chad, I've got a pair of 12s and a 14 that I want. You can obviously add to this or, you know, disagree with this, but a pair of 12s I like: Murray State against Marquette and New Mexico State against Auburn. And I also really like Northern Kentucky with a chance to upset Texas Tech in the first round. I'm curious what you think of those three games and any others you may add to that.
Well, as far as Murray State goes and New Mexico State, I like both those teams. The problem is I think they've got the wrong matchups here. I think that Auburn is playing as hot as anybody in the country right now, having won the SEC tournament and what they did to Tennessee today. Marquette also, I think they've got a little revenge in mind, especially the way they lost in the Big East tournament. And I don't think there's much besides Morant on that Murray State team, and that's the problem. It's kind of like, you know, hey, they got Ja Morant, he's going to be number 2 or number 3 draft pick in the NBA, but there's not enough other pieces there, and I think Marquette beats them. The double-digit seed, the other one you mentioned was Northern Kentucky, and that's a team that there's 2 teams in the Horizon League that did not qualify for the Horizon League tournament even. They were the 9th and 10th place teams, Milwaukee and Cleveland State. Northern Kentucky lost to them in the last week of the regular season, both of them. Yeah. So I'm having trouble believing in this Northern Kentucky team. They've got some talent, but I'm just not on board with them either. I kind of look at the 13th seed, though. Northeastern, primed to beat a Kansas team that has been playing really bad since Azubuike went down. I think that is a really good upset pick there in a 13-4 game. And the other game I kind of keep an eye on here a little bit, Michigan State Bradley in the first round in a 2-15 game. Missouri Valley Conference team in the 15 seed. The Bradley did not do much at all during the regular season. They're kind of lousy, but they caught fire at the right time. This might be a team that pushes the Spartans to the wall here.
So, David, I want to ask you kind of about, you know, I want to circle back to the Michigan State thing. You know, Duke really, I think their upper half of the East region is just tailor-made for them to get through. But I think what's unfortunate is that Michigan State-Duke possible regional final matchup. I think this is, if there is one place where the committee erred, it's right there. I mean, I think Michigan State should have been at least in better consideration for a 1 seed. You know, this indicates that they would have been the eighth team on the seed list, and it just seems criminal to put them in the same region as Duke. What do you think about that matchup?
Well, part of that may have just been travel because, as you know, just because they're matched up with the top number 1 seed does not mean that they were the worst number 2 seed. In fact, they could have been as high as the second best number 2 seed. So I read more of that into just not wanting to send them out west, or like Kentucky was already in Kansas City. But I don't, as good as Michigan State is, and they are really good, it's just when you look at Duke, when you look at Duke at full strength, they are just a machine. They had the one loss to Gonzaga, a really close game. They had beaten Virginia twice, who is the number 2 overall team. They beat North Carolina away from home. And when you stop and look at, they beat Kentucky away from home. when you stop and look at, like, it's not uncommon for a 1 seed to not have any wins against other 1 or 2 seeds. Like last year with Xavier, I think Xavier only had 1 win against a protected seed, or if they had more than that, it wasn't many. Duke has 4 or 5 wins away from home against teams on the top 2 lines. I mean, that is almost, for the top of the bracket, historically sickly good. So it's not like they would go into that having it being in a situation where they hadn't faced a matchup like that before and won. Whereas Michigan State, while they're really good, they haven't played up to that level.
Chad, the Louisville-Minnesota matchup, did the committee forget that Rick Pitino is not coaching Louisville, or did Griggs sneak into the room and have some say in that?
That was the only reason why I was glad that Minnesota was a 10th seed. I mean, yeah, I know Rick Pitino isn't there. We don't have father versus son, but hey, this is going to be a hell of a storyline, Louisville, Minnesota, and Richard Pitino Jr. there coaching against his father's ex-team. It's going to be fun. It's going to be a tough ticket in Des Moines with Michigan, Michigan State, and the Louisville-Minnesota game there, not to mention Florida out there as well. So it's going to be a fun, it's going to be a tough ticket.
I want to, before we wrap this up, I want to kind of go over some of your favorite matchups of the first round and maybe potential matchups there in the second round. One I particularly like that stands out right here in Columbus, Ohio, Cincinnati and Iowa. I think that's going to be a fantastic matchup. You got a couple of physical teams. Iowa, a very good offensive team. Cincinnati, a very good defensive team. I like that Cincinnati-Iowa matchup, as well as the potential Cincinnati-Iowa versus Tennessee matchup in the second round in Columbus. That, to me, I think is the most exciting pod for me in those first 2 rounds. David, I'll go back to you. What matchups stand out for you that you're excited about seeing?
If the chalk holds, Buffalo St. John's is interesting because you have 2 New York-based teams that don't regularly play, and Buffalo's a good story anyway. But if the chalk holds and they play Texas Tech, that is going to be a really, really good game because, I mean, Buffalo, if you watch them, they can beat you 52-50 or 100-98. They can. They're real compatible with a lot of different styles of play, and Texas Tech is really good as well. But that just intrigues me because of how versatile Buffalo is. Another one, like it's a first round matchup, and I don't think Wofford's going to go any further. But I do, as hot as Seton Hall was playing as well in the Big East tournament as they did, and as hot as Wofford is, I think that's another game that I'm really looking forward to.
Chad, what matchups excite you, either in the first round or potential matchups in the second round?
I think there's an interesting 8-9 game in the East region. The VCU Central Florida game with Taco Fall there for Central Florida, a VCU team that hopefully they're at full strength. If they're not at full strength, Central Florida might roll them. The other game I think we got to circle, of course, is the Utah State-Washington game, not because I'm excited about it, but because it may be one of the most pathetically bad games of basketball you see all season. These are 2 teams that are not good teams playing in an 8-9 game. If you've seen Utah State play this year, you want to gouge your eyes out. So but that's why I'd circle that one.
Well, to be fair, you probably want to gouge your eyes out when you're around David anyway, but that's going to be especially the case with that matchup. So I want to wrap it up with Final Four picks. Give everybody a chance to get theirs. I'm going to go with Michigan State, Gonzaga, and Kentucky. And you know what? I'm going to go against my better judgment. I'm going to say Virginia. Kentucky, Virginia, Michigan State, Gonzaga. David, what say you on your Final Four picks?
I'm going to go Duke, Tennessee. I like Kentucky, and, well, I don't like them, but I think they're going to get there, but in Gonzaga. Chad,
what do you say?
I'm going Duke, Tennessee. I agree with David there, but I'm going Houston in the Final Four out of the Midwest. I'm going to go Texas Tech out of the West region.
Interesting. A couple pair of Texas teams there for Chad. I like it. Going on a limb there. I really, really like that. Two 3 seeds from the state of Texas. Should be interesting. Well, guys, that is going to wrap it up for us, but I appreciate you coming on. David, even you. I appreciate even you coming on.
Well, yeah, Kyle, can I just say one more thing? This Cincinnati-Ohio State game, I know that it took 100 years to get it. thank God that you got it and that you guys won down there, because without it, had you just opened against some crap team in a home bye game, I wonder if you're even in.
That's actually probably true. It turned out that wound up being the signature win. That road at Cincinnati, the very first game of the year, was Ohio State's most important victory, and I'm not sure they'd get in without it. So I think you're absolutely right about that.
Yeah.
So anyway, Chad, keep things rolling over there, Hoops HD, and keep David in line for me. I know that's a tall order, but I think you can pull it off.
The first I could do, the second I'll cross my fingers, but we just kind of go day by day and see what happens here.
Yeah, that's all you can do. Chad Sherwood, David Griggs, feel free to check them out, hoopshd.com. They do a great job covering college basketball. They have my longtime internet friends, and they do a great job. So hope you will check them out on Hoops HD.
Stretch runtime here at Unscripted Ohio. Kick up your feet as we cross the finish line with the Buckeye Beat, the latest in Ohio State news and notes.
Kick the tires and light the fires, Big Daddy.
Before we wrap it up, a quick couple of recruiting notes. Nothing earth-shattering here. There's not really anything new that you haven't heard already, but I have a couple of takes that I want to get off my chest here because I think this is interesting. If you missed this last week, by the way, Kendall Milton confirmed, and this has kind of been known, especially if you've listened to the show here. Mark Gibler mentioned this a few weeks ago, so this is not earth-shattering news, but Kendall Milton, the 5-star running back out of Clovis, California, confirmed that he will be visiting Ohio State in the first week of April. So you do have that to look forward to. Kendall Milton, a very, very good running back in the 2020 recruiting class, will be on Ohio State's campus here in spring coming up. Secondly, interesting bit of news that has been kind of speculated before, but Legend Cavazos has said on Twitter on Sunday night that he will be bringing Julian Fleming with him to his visit here in a couple weeks. That's interesting news because, Fleming, it's long been known that he may or may not be a heavy Penn State favorite. His girlfriend is going there. I don't know if Ohio State has a legitimate chance at Fleming or not. He said all the right things on Twitter, and we know how social media accounts can go for recruits. Sometimes, quite simply, what they say on Twitter means absolutely nothing. Jack Squiddle, as one of my friends would say. So I don't know if Julian Fleming is serious about Ohio State. Maybe he is, maybe he isn't. But getting him on campus with what you would hope would be a potential Ohio State influence in Cavazos, that's all you can hope for. And this kind of ties into something that interests me because this Ohio State 2020 recruiting class with Mikhail Sherman, potentially Rakeem Jarrett, who's visiting Georgia, it has the chance to come together and be an absolutely historic class for the Buckeyes. But it really starts, I think, at the top. They need somebody to take role of that leader that they had early on in the class. And that leader was Paris Johnson. And ever since the Urban Meyer retirement and Ryan Day taking over, Paris Johnson has not gone away as a commitment to Ohio State, but he has never really come back in and be that vocal leader, at least publicly. Now, we don't know what he's telling recruits in private, but at least publicly, he seems to be open. He took a visit to Tennessee. He posted on his Twitter this weekend a picture of him in a Georgia uniform and, talking about, playing up a possible commitment to the Bulldogs. And look, I don't read anything into this. I think Paris Johnson is all Buckeye, if you ask me, and I think he will be in the Ohio State class. I've seen some people say, partially joking, partially not, comparing him to Jackson Carman and being another Jackson Carman. And I know some people aren't serious when they said it. Others are. I don't think it's anything like that situation. I think Paris Johnson will come back in the fold. But it's important, I think, for Ohio State to get him locked up sooner rather than later, because if they can get a guy who has a lot of influence on other recruits in the 2020 class, they can really make some hay with some of these 4- and 5-star guys that they're after. I mean, they've got a chance to put together a legendary recruiting class. And, they're already getting it done at wide receiver. Brian Hartline is killing it. Julian Fleming would be icing on a cake if they can get him. And even if they can't, they're going to do well at that position no matter what. I have no concerns that Ohio State would have any problems getting 4 or 5 really good receivers in this class. But when you start talking about other positions, if you want to wrap up, a Brian Bresci as a long shot candidate or any of these, Mikael Sherman, wherever you're looking at in this class, I think it starts with getting a couple of guys in the fold that are committed and 100% to be recruiting leaders, because I don't think you have to have package deals in college football or college basketball. I don't think you necessarily need guys recruiting for you and to have a great class, but I think it helps. And if you've got a Paris Johnson and a couple other 5-stars lined up that are recruiting for you, I think it can really get the ball rolling and get some momentum. So that'll be interesting to see, but Legend Cabezos saying that Julian Fleming will be coming with him. Paris Johnson, meanwhile, continues to visit other schools. We'll see how long that lasts. But just some notes, just some thoughts I had on the 2020 recruiting class. I'll get Mark on later this week, and we'll get a recruiting update and kind of get his opinion on some of these issues, as well as the Trey LaRue commitment, which I have not spoken about yet, and I apologize for that. As the basketball season is wound down, we've been busy talking about that, but I do want to get Mark's take on Trey LaRue and his commitment here later on Friday on the show. That will wrap it up. Reminder to listen to the Scarlet and Great podcast on Wednesday. Corey and Johnny, I'm sure, will have the latest on Ohio State basketball, and I believe they've got an interview coming up also with Andrew, who is the OSU Hoops Insider account on Twitter. That'll be an interesting interview to hear what's going on with Ohio State basketball recruiting. So please check them out on Wednesday here on the Unscripted Ohio Network. Of course, you can check us out every Monday and Friday on BuckeyeGrove.com, as well as on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, and Stitcher. Catch me on Twitter at KYLAM8. Of course, we are brought to you by JFQ Lending. Please go to jfqlending.com for all your home purchase and refinance needs. That's going to wrap it up, everybody. Have a great week. We will see you again on Friday.
You can get new episodes of Unscripted Ohio on Mondays and Fridays exclusively at BuckeyeGrove.com or anytime on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all things Ohio State.